Hey, my friends, it's Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. And have you noticed the evolution of the word literally over the last, it's been a long time now. This is not a fresh phenomenon. 20 years, 30 years. It's become a thing where when you just want to emphasize a point that you're making, even if your point is entirely figurative or metaphorical, you can just add literally to the front. I am literally going to talk about the elephant in the room. Well, the funny thing about that statement is unless there is literally an elephant in the room, you literally aren't going to talk about an elephant in the room. Going to get pedantic for a minute. What you're actually going to do is literally have a difficult conversation about a metaphorical elephant that is symbolic of a big issue everybody knows is present, but that everybody's been avoiding talking about. Literally, that conversation is going to happen, and literally, that figurative expression helps to illustrate it. Well, the reality is that language is tricky and hard, and especially if you're not a native English speaker, dude, stuff like that can really trip you up. My wife tutors English. She volunteers. She helps people who move to this country and need to pass English tests and learn the language well enough to work or to get into school. And she's working with a student right now, and some of these colloquialisms like that, where you're messing with the literal and the figurative, is really, really tricky for them. And I totally understand that. Well, likewise, when you look back a couple thousand years and you come to key passages in the Bible that set a huge precedent for the direction that all of church is going to go, all of Christianity is going to go forever, and you're a couple languages removed and a couple millennia removed and about 15 cultures removed from what was being said there are just a few key pinch points where that literally or figuratively divide can be very, very tricky. And in Matthew 26 and verse 28, we run into one of those. Really, it bounces back into 27 as well. For those of you, quick disclaimer, who have been around Christianity and church for a long time, you're looking at our trip through the book of Matthew here, and you're like, all right, well, we're going to get to the Last Supper. We're going to get to the stuff about eating and drinking what would eventually become the elements of communion. And you were like, oh, that's going to be interesting because people really disagree about that. For those of you who are here and are outsiders to Christianity, you're like, I've kind of heard of it. I'm interested in it. I went when I was a kid. I'm here because I just like to learn and I want to understand this, or I want to be empathetic to people I care about. As always, I think you're awesome. Thank you for being here. And the debate that we talk about here might at first seem to be picayune-ish from a little more of an outsider perspective. Like, why does this even matter? I promise you, it's not just because of insanity. There are reasons that Christians have debated how literally or figuratively to take Jesus' words about the Last Supper over the centuries. And I'm not going to sort that out over a series of compounding episodes. Instead, I just want to cover the basic framework of it here. And then, I don't know, I'm not going to see internet. I'm not going to convince anybody of anything. I'm just going to throw it out and let you think about it. You can do with it what you want. Read the text in the way that makes sense to you. Matthew 27, no, not 27, back to 26. While they were eating, Jesus took bread and gave thanks and broke it and gave it to his disciples, saying, now catch this phrase. This is important on the literally figuratively thing. Take and eat. This is my body. Then he took the cup, gave thanks, and offered it to them, saying, drink from it, all of you. This is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins. Now, we've talked a lot about the Passover symbolism, the covenant business, and all of that the last few days. Today, I want to focus on what figure of speech is Jesus using here? Literal or figurative? Is he using some kind of metaphor? Wait, no, like or as is a metaphor. So I guess this would be a simile if he's using this in a way that is non-literal but figurative. Or many Christians through the centuries have read this as, no, it's just straight up literal. Somehow a repeatable miracle is happening here by which this bread turns into, in some way, the literal body of Christ, and then you eat it. And in some way, the cup turns into the literal blood of Christ, and then you drink it. Going to do my best to be fair to all of these positions. Catholicism, Orthodoxy, and Anglicanism all look similar on this, but if you sat and talked very specific details with anybody from each of those traditions, you would find that there are a few different wrinkles and that each of those groups is drawing on a little different philosophical tradition from the classical world to land where they land on this point. Catholics, of course, are the group who are headquartered in Rome. I'm oversimplifying everything here. The Orthodox, there's a bunch of different regional ethnic expressions, but overwhelmingly, this is the Eastern Church, historically associated with Constantinople, Byzantium, Istanbul. They're all the same town. They just had different names at different times. And then the Anglican Church is something of a hybrid between Protestantism and Catholicism. Again, please forgive me, I'm super oversimplifying. That is born out of the Elizabethan age during the English Reformation of the latter half of the 16th century. All three of those groups have a presence all around the world. All three of those groups are super into the Bible, and all three of them would say, no, like we are the historical church. All three of those groups take Jesus' words here literally. Usually if somebody is from a tradition that takes Jesus' words here literally, they will call the Lord's Supper the Eucharist first and foremost. I mean, they'd use the term communion and the Lord's table or the Lord's Supper for what would happen in a church setting. But where the distinctives would be evident would be the belief that through the apostolic authority handed down from Jesus to Peter and the other apostles, handed down to generation after generation of leaders from there, that this is the gospel, this is the message of the kingdom that's passed down faithfully from one to the next, that the church, the formal church, that is, institutionally and all of its grand history, that this represents Christ's bride, the real true church on earth, the persisting church, and that church alone has spiritual authority to offer up a prayer of consecration, of transformation, if you will, over these elements, which at the start of communion is just bread and it's just wine. But when this prayer is offered, a transformation occurs at the level of the substance. That's the term that at least Anglicans and Catholics use. I'm not sure that Orthodox use the exact same language. Now, that language, substance, is descended from the philosophical thought of Aristotle. You will recall about 400 years before the time of Jesus, you got three gigantic Athenian philosophers, one that came after the next. The first was Socrates. He didn't write anything down, but Plato recorded a bunch of stuff about him. That's how we know things about Socrates. And he was very interested in natural philosophy, how things came to be. I said I was going to do this in one. There's no way I'm doing it in one. I'm already planning on splitting it into two. Oh, well, just bear with me. We're going to get as far as we can get. Socrates had a student named Plato. Plato was very interested in how we know stuff and the relationship between the unseen abstract world of ideas and truths that exist beyond the physical and beyond our five senses. He was interested in the difference between that and the stuff that we do encounter with our five senses, in addition to being interested in a ton of other stuff as well. Well, Plato had a student then named Aristotle, and Plato and Aristotle had a healthy mentor-mentee disagreement about the existence of reality beyond the five senses. I'm way oversimplifying this debate between classical rationalism and classical empiricism. So if you're a philosophy person and you're just pulling your hair out, understand I'm being selective and quick for the purposes of just trying to make this thing make sense. At its most basic level, Plato thought there was a knowable reality that exists beyond perception. Aristotle was more skeptical about that. Catholic and Anglican thought about what happens with the bread and the cup is tied pretty closely to some Aristotelian, that being things about Aristotle, ideas that have to do with the relationship between all of the elements that make a thing and the perceivable elements that make a thing a thing. It's just complicated, and even the fast version takes a little bit to unpack. We got all the time in the world. We're just going to keep chipping away at Matthew as we chip away at Matthew. And how you read this passage, it really is pretty pivotal in terms of what you do if you want to live out this kingdom stuff we're reading about in Matthew in any kind of community of faith. This is the big deal. It matters. And so we are going to linger a little bit here. It's going to take me another day to get through the Catholic, Anglican, Orthodox, more high church position on this. And so Yeah, we'll just take another day. We'll work on it and try to give that a really fair shake. And then we'll try to give a really fair shake to the other read after that. And then, of course, it's the internet and you can just do whatever you want to with it. Y'all are great. I love that we can do this kind of thing together here. Thanks so much. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour Podcast. Let's do this again soon.